It pains me to say this to such a small, relatively lovely community, but it needs to be said directly. Little Nightmares 3 is not coming at all. Period. Anywho, hello, my little Jimbos, Jimbobs, and Jimbobinas. How are you? I'm fine. You know, I woke up this morning and had horrible abdominal pain for a majority of the morning. And while I was lying in bed, writhing in pain, you know, it reminded me of something. It reminded me of that barbaric, frail, yet feral little girl in a bright yellow raincoat. No, not her. Not her. This little thing. The thing is, Little Nightmares is a small horror franchise that began in 2017, which is crazy because it feels like it really wasn't that long ago when it came out, but then again, I guess 2017 isn't necessarily that long ago. Anyway, it's a small, debatably short 3D platformer where the main character, Six, is the playable protagonist through the majority of the series. She has a very narrow focus on the one thing she has set out to accomplish, escaping the maw, no matter who or what tries to stand in her way. Very much an anti-hero, this little one. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are super familiar with the story of the Little Nightmares franchise, but I assume that if you're even remotely interested in the whole concept of A Little Nightmares 3, then I mean, you obviously must be familiar with the first two games, because why the hell would you give a shit about Little Nightmares 3 if you don't know anything about Little Nightmares 2 or Little Nightmares? Anyway, okay, still, I will do my best to skip around a story, sort of. Well, I'm just gonna take that back immediately. I'm sorry. We're talking about Little Nightmares 3. There's no way that I can talk about it without talking about what happened in the last two games plus the DLCs. So, I think instead I'm just going to say spoiler alert, or what is it? No, content warning. There are gonna be a lot of spoils, like a lot of spoiling in this video. So if you want to like experience the whole story, or at least majority of it, you know, yourself beforehand, I suggest you click away from this video, turn it off, do what you need to do, mute it, do whatever you need to do, turn on your gaming console of choice or your PC and play the game to the end and finish it. Okay? Take your time, hun. But hurry up, because because literally this franchise has been a thing since 2017. Hurry up. Okay. Anywho, after the absolute banger of a sequel prequel, Little Nightmares 2, the community of this franchise has been completely smitten with our adorable right-hand man, Mono, ever since his debut. He's a relatively silent, intuitive kid who ain't afraid to grab a pipe and swing it. He's quickly made his way up the popularity polls of Little Nightmares characters, let alone protagonists, and has often battled with Six for the top spot. Figuratively, that is. Well, kinda. And ever since this entry's release in February of 2021, which is like crazy that the sequel came out only last year, because it feels like it came out at least 3 years ago. At least for me, it feels like it came out like 2 or 3 years ago, but apparently it was literally last year in a couple months when it released. But regardless, ever since the game's release in February of 2021, the studios who developed the game series, Tarsier Studios, made the shocking announcement not too long after that they'd be stepping away from the franchise for good to move on to other projects, they said. Don't mind me being a little bitter. I'm just bitter. The thing is, while the developers decided to move away from the franchise, the people who produced this game, Bandai Namco, has stated they wanted to keep at it. Little Nightmares will officially continue. Yay! right? Well, about that, to be very direct about it, Bandai Namco are only the producer. So what that means is that they're only responsible for like funding the game, like deciding who is or isn't on the team, etc. Like sort of like manager type stuff, basically. Ultimately, they are not the developers per se. With this in mind, the state of Little Nightmares is kind of like this. It's sitting on the shelf, and it's sitting and sitting and sitting until a new team of developers come along in preparation to work on the next game or DLC. Problem is, there's no telling how long that might be. Truth be told, I'm certain it's going to be a long time before any new development team picks up the Little Nightmares franchise. Honestly, I have a habit of sort of expecting indie developers to contribute further to this franchise. I guess especially since this franchise began as like an indie game and is pretty much still considered just, an indie game that got super popular, I guess. So I don't know. I tend to expect the indie developers to contribute further to this franchise, although the kind of fan games produced by the Little Nightmares community is quite different than, like what we might see coming out of the FNAF community. Although, to be fair, there are definitely a few genuine reasons for that, I think. Like, the fact that the FNAF community is so much larger and, so obviously there will be lots of people who might know how to make games and, know how to make games pretty good. Regardless, there likely won't be a new development team coming along for a good long time. So, unfortunately, I think this community is going to go silent for an indefinite period of time. Worst case scenario, the community dies and moves on to the next best Little Nightmares-esque thing. Now, there was a time not too long ago from the time I'm writing the script where there was a supposed leak. Within this leak, it claimed Little Nightmares 3 was going to release sometime in 2023. As far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was confirmed to be a hoax. There won't be any Little Nightmares in 2023, unfortunately, especially since there still isn't a new development team to work on actually creating said game entry in the first place. So how in the hell could there possibly be a Little Nightmares 3 next year when there's literally still no team who has announced that they will be picking up the Little Nightmares franchise? So it literally won't happen. On top of that, the elephant in the room must be addressed. If there is going to be a Little Nightmares 3 and or Little Nightmares 2 DLC, then what is it going to be about? So let's talk about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that many people of the community predict, things that well-known game theorists on YouTube predict, and then things that I predict. In the comments, I want you guys to tell me all about the things that you predict. Be kind, but don't be afraid to state your potential storylines, even if it might involve an unpopular opinion. So let's talk about a DLC. Personally, I think if ever, a new a new development team comes along, word vomit. If ever a new development team comes along, the first thing they should do, in my opinion, is create and release a DLC. Not because so many fans want one per se, rather, I believe the importance of a DLC in this case is a way to prove two things to the pre-existing audience for Little Nightmares. One, it proves these new developers did their homework. They understand the world and the lore that was already pre-established, and they are aware of what kind of people the characters have been proven to be. meaning that these new developers won't come in and like change everything and like make the series feel so different than what it originally was made out to be, and then drive away the original fan base and all that horrible crap that happens a lot when like new teams work on an old project for half. And then two, the importance of a DLC also shows that this new team in question is likely going to make a hell of a game out of Little Nightmares 3. So all in all, it proves to us the franchise is in good hands. With that said, the topic that's been up for discussion for quite a long time is what the DLC could be about. Many people want a DLC that takes place in or around the barber shop. The barber shop is an unused location within the world of Little Nightmares. It's unclear as to where exactly the barber shop was meant to be, though it was likely somewhere between the school and the suburbia of Pale City. It's dank, dark, murky. It's a dank, dark, murky place that's damn near desolate. No different than the majority of locations in the Pale City. While it is true that this place has seen better days, not to mention Pale City succumbing to the power of the mysterious signal tower, this rundown barbershop still gets its own grooming. It's taken care of by a single, vile man, the barber. The barber ain't much different from the other overgrown inhabitants of the land. He hardly has a heart for the people who lay their heads in his chair, let alone the skirmish little children scurrying across his wet, hairy floor. No different than any other indeed, you must be cautious slipping by the barber, because if he catches you, well, check the news. The barbershop would have a very interesting level, although it'd probably be not very different from all the other levels we've seen before throughout the franchise, sneak in and sneak out. This familiar mechanic makes the Little Nightmares games pretty easy to play and like very, very, I'm gonna say like beginner friendly. But since it's almost all about stealth. Though I do think I'd love to see something a little more different. Like, I don't know. I think I'd like the barbershop level to be a little wider and maybe feel more like 3D. Like a little more like you're in 3D space, like you are in 3D space, but just a little less linear. In other words, perhaps a slightly more dynamic camera view from time to time with like an option to switch from standard view to dynamic view. I don't know. Just tossing ideas around here. While the barber is most everyone's go-to choice as the next antagonist, there is another potential candidate who might make for quite a show. Maybe at some point, Pale City was well known for its cuisine, because if there's one thing the city never runs out of, it's the desire to consume. One of the most distinct actors of the city's showbiz capitalizes on that pretty well. With no name, no face, and frankly, no head, this man is only known as the Baker. Waltzing into this mangled cluster of wires and buildings, you might want to consider cleaning yourself up a bit. It smells great somehow. There's a heavy aroma wafting through the air. Nothing beats a home-cooked meal, right? Follow your nose and it'll lead you into the kitchen. There you will find an average-built man whisking away in front of a collection of wired cameras. Busy as he may seem, don't let yourself get carried away. He finds it quite rude of you to constantly step into his shot. The Baker is a severely underdeveloped character, despite being another canonical dweller of Pale City. This is likely because, unlike the barber or even the lunch lady, who would have appeared during the cafeteria scene with the bullies and only appears as a corpse in the freezer room now, the Baker, you see, was never given a 3D model. He was not given one at all. By that knowledge, It's safe to say he was never truly intended to be a part of the Little Nightmares 2 game. Like, unlike the barber or the lunch lady, I don't think the baker, or any of the actors, but really the baker, I don't think he was meant to really be in the game for real. However, that could easily be made up for in a DLC. Or even the Little Nightmares 3 installment, should it ever come. His debut might take place in a location either dubbed the baker's house or the studios. Something simple as to follow the trend of naming conventions of locations in the Little Nightmares franchise. They're usually not that complicated. Perhaps traversing the studios will be sort of like having to evade the seeing eyes all over the mall, except this time those eyes are either living entities hidden within flesh walls or recording cameras. Not too many though, as to not make the level too difficult to traverse. This level may require a little more stealth than usual though. There would be too many watching beings for you to simply track and run your way through, especially once the baker and the other actors go on break. That said, I think those are the two main characters cut from the games that a lot of people tend to make speculations about. Regarding the barber, speculation about him makes plenty of sense, since he was the closest to an additional fully fledged boss we could have had. Theorists, fans, and even myself have made up a bunch of scenarios about ways to include the barber in future works. I think for the most part, people tend to stop there, but I've also seen my fair share of theorists and other fans speculating about the baker, the actors in general, and even more minor antagonists like the principal and the lunch lady. But you know, whether the next Little Nightmares project should be a DLC or a fully fledged third installment to a series isn't the only thing to talk about. Neither is the debate as to which antagonist to include, further develop, or leave totally scrapped. Another important matter to debate is what to make of the protagonist of the next project, and then what to do with the existing protagonist. Let's start with addressing our previous protagonist. So far in the Little Nightmares series, the main protagonist of each game has gone in this specific order: the girl in the yellow raincoat, Mono, the runaway kid, and then Six. A portion of Six's story occurs at the same time as the girl in the yellow raincoat, Mono, and the runaway kid. By the final installment of the game series, which lore-wise will conclude with the events of the first Little Nightmares, Six serves as the one and only protagonist only in that installment until the very end. Knowing who each of the main characters has been, we can easily rule out the girl in the yellow raincoat and the runaway kid from being future protagonists. This is because, again, spoiler alert, I guess, even though this is sort of old news at this point, both of those characters are dead. Okay, the girl in a yellow raincoat and the runaway kid, they are dead, like, canonically. The girl in a yellow raincoat is chased off of a cliff where she falls to her death, likely hitting the rocks or falling into the water too narrowly and probably snapping her neck or something, especially based on the way she falls in. The runaway kid is not only cursed by the end of his story and turned into a gnome, but he is the poor, unfortunate gnome who ends up being eaten by Six when he offers her a sausage. Oh my gosh, this poor kid, man. He laid on the ground motionless, so it's pretty safe to say he's dead. I mean, he could have survived, but realistically, who was gonna heal him? Who was gonna heal him? Surely not the lady who turned him into a gnome herself. Surely not any of the greedy guests. Surely not the guests, okay? Surely not the other gnomes. I mean, hell, they're gnomes themselves. They literally can't even help themselves or turn themselves back. How could they help this kid? Probably none of the other unturned kids, they're probably not going to help either, because while it is possible for children in this universe to have powers, it seems that many children don't. or if they might have powers, those powers haven't set in yet. They haven't really manifested. Not only that, but what are the odds that a kind child with the ability to heal or reverse events who likes to help people will conveniently come along right after 6 cannibalizes the runaway kid? So yeah, no, he's not a contender anymore. The only possibilities left from the lineup I provided are 6 and Mono. Oh, Mono. See, 6's story is a very long and very thorough. It is a very long and very thorough story. She's been shown to be on the run from the horror of the world around her for a long time. And perhaps most of her youth, we can assume, from as early as the events of the girl in a yellow raincoat leaving her crashed air balloon to escape the pretender's manor, or manor? How do you even say that? Mansion. This is make it easy for me. Mansion. Okay, from as early as the events of escaping the pretender's mansion. Okay, where 6 eventually teams up with the yellow coat girl in hopes of escaping that isolated place together to the next journey. You know, somehow at some point in time, 6 is captured and held hostage by the hunter. For what? Who knows why? Maybe the hunter got lonely, or maybe he wanted a smaller, cuter little kid to taxidermize and prop up in his home like a cute little accessory. It's not like Tarsier will ever fucking tell us. Anywho, 6's long journey ends with her standing upon the floating island surrounding the base of the mall. She's killed the lady and her other assailants, and has left behind whatever extra baggage she couldn't afford or didn't desire to keep along with her. Now, with life-absorbing powers, she is stranded. Chances are she is only halfway finished with completing her goal of escaping the mall. But so long as she can't escape its surface and get herself away from the ocean, how else will her story continue? Next up, Mono. Mono.
Cassie.
Mono. Everyone loves this kid, and honestly, how could anyone not? Mono's story is quite fragmented and a little bit confusing. A portion of his journey begins with him hiding among a few apartment kids. They are panicking, struggling to fight their way out of the burning, shambling complex. The sprinklers still work by some miracle and puts out the flames. But then a tall, terrifying man begins to make his way into the building, dragging the apartment kids away one by one. Mono, scared of being the next kidnapped kid, hides in a rather obscure spot, a broken television. There's no telling if his hiding spot worked, or if he ended up having to fight his way through, or take the riskiest path and flat out run away, but he somehow managed to escape this dilemma. He teleports out of a TV in the middle of the forest for whatever reason. And as he sets out to head for the signal tower, perhaps in hopes of finding that tall, thin man who terrorized him and those other kids some time ago, Mono ends up befriending a strange, fidgety girl from the hunter's house. We know her as 6, but Mono likely never knew her name, same way she likely never knew his. By the end of Mono's journey alongside 6, they end up torn apart from each other when 6 stumbles into the path of the thin man. She beckoned for Mono to help her as he's done so many times, but this particular time, Mono was too afraid. He'd spent so long running from that man to begin with, heading towards the signal tower for some sort of solution, or in search of a piece to the puzzle that is the enigma of the thin man. the monster who is keen on following and terrorizing Mono wherever he goes and attacking any other children Mono might have around. Mono cowers further under the bed, and in that moment, 6 is snatched away by the Thin Man. The remainder of Mono's journey follows the small boy with a newfound resolve. He knows enough about the Thin Man and the signal tower to guess that his recent partner in crime is somewhere in there, trapped. When Mono arrives to save 6, he is shocked by her horribly disfigured and distorted body. Nevertheless, she's his friend, so he does what he can to save her, even though it meant hurting her and breaking what little trust she had left for him in the aftermath of her kidnapping. Alas, 2 betrayals were far too many, or maybe 6 knew all along that she would only go so far with Mono by her side. Either way, 6 gets ahead of Mono as the signal tower is attempting to trap them within. She's just before a portal, and seemingly the only exit. Ahead of her lies her escape from probable death or imprisonment. Behind her dangles the little beady-eyed Mono, watching her expectantly as she leans towards him. He watches her pull away from him and leave, and continues watching her all the way down to the depths of the tower. Mono miraculously survives the fall, and he wanders aimlessly until he finds somewhere to sit. Now sat in the chair, Mono's story comes to a twisted close as he eventually grows angry, bitter, resentful, and older, growing into the Thin Man himself. So, technically, Mono's story is finished. Most all of us definitely don't like it, okay, and that's true. But truthfully, it sounds like this is where his journey is meant to conclude. Now that we've remembered the statuses of both our beloved hero and anti-hero, it's not too hard to think who's likely to be involved in the next installment and who's not. Mono's story is essentially, more or less, finished. While I believe any writer can write a character in somehow if they really, really want to, the reality that I see is that there's no way to do that with Mono's character without ruining the sense of backstabbing betrayal you're supposed to feel by the end of Little Nightmares 2. Plus, I can't think of any way to include him, as himself that is, and not the Thin Man, without messing up what's canon, which is that he eventually grows into an adult and becomes the Thin Man. Then again, if I remember right, it's been so long since I've thought about the lore and whatnot of Little Nightmares this much. And no, I didn't rewatch a bunch of theory videos prior to writing this script. Don't judge me. But if I remember right, there's like a special cutscene like somewhere. I don't know if it's a trailer. I don't think it's in the ending. It's like some cutscene somewhere in the Little Nightmares franchise where the Thin Man can be seen pressing against a screen in a secret room. A room that was revealed to be his, I think, or have ties to him. I could definitely be wrong. I caught myself trying to find that scene on YouTube and I could not find anything, but I swear I saw it, okay? I swear. Regardless, that's the only hint that Mono might make a return, since he isn't dead after all. I mean, he's not dead, he's not decommissioned, so I mean, he's alive and well, you know. He just likely won't return the way we want him to, and will most definitely return as an angry, bitter villain looking to hunt 6 down, or whoever the main character for the next installment might be. Either way, that settles that Mono simply can't be a protagonist, okay? He simply can't. Our next plausible option is 6. Similarly to Mono, 6 is canonically alive. Her physical status as it currently stands is stranded on the surface of the maw. The reality is she's probably starving and may have even went back into the maw in order to find more things to eat. or she learned how to fish and kind of just grew a taste for like fish only or something. I don't know. Honestly, it's pretty plausible for Six to be a protagonist once again. I mean, she is sort of like the it girl in the world of Little Nightmares. Like, she's sort of like that girl, you know, being the literal first protagonist to the game series, and also being the only character to have survived for so long. I mean, that girl is durable, man. She survived the craftsman, the butler, the pretender, the hunter, the teacher, the doctor, the thin man, the janitor, the chefs, the guests, and the big bad Lady Geisha herself. This girl Six is mad durable, and clearly she's in it for the long run. Having survived all of that, I can imagine her surviving just a little bit longer. The question is, surviving for what? From what we know of the Little Nightmares universe, let's just be honest, it's really not the kind of world you'd want to live in, no matter who you are. Everywhere in this world seems to be either desolate and like painfully lonely and probably boring as all living hell too, or full of monsters coming in the forms of both foes and friends. Seemingly nothing and no one can be trusted in this world, and there isn't any pocket of happiness anywhere in sight. Even worse, if there is some kind of nirvana or safe haven, it's probably very difficult to reach and would probably be inaccessible to Six anyway. Knowing the writing tone, the original writers like maintained for the lore we already have. If there is a safe haven somewhere in the Little Nightmares universe, Six would probably be forever imprisoned or die before she can even reach it. Still, I think it's fair to propose a DLC that sort of serves as the final tying of loose ends. The thing that finally brings a close to Six, Mono, or Six and Mono's story, where in this case, Mono will be better known as the Thin Man. I can't help but think Six's story will end with her failing somehow, and the Thin Man will achieve some sort of success in seeking revenge. But ultimately, I can't see Mono and Six having happy endings, let alone together. It'd be a miracle if they could get happy endings separate from each other, or canonically make up and magically reverse the effects of the signal tower and return Mono to being a young boy. Although probably not a young boy, probably a little older for the sake of time continuity. But the bottom line is, Mono and Six's story should come to a definite end in a DLC, I think. Now, as for Little Nightmares 3, there are quite a few possibilities. Like, there's quite a few possibilities as far as protagonists go, or potential protagonists. Namely, the 5 kids best known from the comics. No, not those comics. Yes, those comics. Those kids are, in no particular order, the toddler, the girl with the pigtails, the lollipop kid, the ghost kid, and the lone kid from the apartments. What I find so interesting about these characters is that most of them have 3D models. The only odd one out is the toddler, who probably wouldn't be able to be a playable protagonist anyway because they're a literal tot, you know? And what exactly can a tot possibly do in the world of Little Nightmares? Like, what the hell can they do? Honestly, I'm still trying to understand how babies are taken care of in a Little Nightmares universe anyway. Like, does this mean there are adults out there in this universe who are actually kind enough towards children to have and raise them, at least until tot age? Knowing that canonically the adults in this game are essentially mindless, non-thinking things that operate purely on fulfilling some random intrinsic primal desire of theirs, does that mean there were people who had primal desires to have kids? You know what? Yeah, That actually sounds like something many people would have a primal desire to do, actually. Never mind. Anywho, a toddler is a tricky character to make a protagonist out of. So I totally understand not even bothering to make a model for this one. Not to mention the toddler actually gets kidnapped by the end of their episode in the newer Little Nightmares comics, so yeah, no tots allowed, okay? Aside from the toddler, there's the girl with the pigtails. So she's most likely dead. Not only is she spotted and snatched up, quite literally at that, by the doctor, who's a lunatic, by the way, but in the Little Nightmares 2 game, there is literally an Easter egg in a room similar to the one that the little girl was trapped in. In that room, you see a shadowy kid as well as a big gaping hole in the ground, alluding to the hole she was trying to dig, and if I remember right, the hole she did dig into the ground with a spoon. Putting two and two together, one can draw the conclusion that this ghostly figure is meant to represent the little girl, which also suggests that she died, so no, she's probably not going to be our legitimate protagonist either. Or at least not for long, as the same can be said for all of the other kids I'm about to brief. The lollipop kid is unlikely to be a protagonist either. No different than the girl with the pigtails, he is represented in the Little Nightmares 2 game as a shadowy kid in a locker. It's a parallel to the last spot the lollipop kid was seen alive, which is attempting to hide from the teacher in a locker after beating in the porcelain skulls of so many bullies. Unfortunately for him, the teacher spotted him somehow, and the comic ends there, leaving you to wonder what happened next. Though it ain't rocket science, the sadistic teacher has a damn magical neck that can stretch indefinitely, and as hinted at by her name and by her mannerisms in-game, she is as far from sweet as can be. She most definitely killed that poor kid and ate him too, so yeah, no lollipop kid as a protagonist, okay? The ghost kid is also questionable, See, their story ends on a cliffhanger as well, where the family they tried to avoid while the TV was playing suddenly catches them in the midst of planning their safe descent from a high up window. There is no real telling what happened here, but knowing what happens to Mono whenever he stares into the distorted face of a viewer, it's easy to guess what likely happened to the ghost kid when the screen went black. He was probably squashed to death by intense pressure coming from the viewer, Therefore, this kid is also ruled out and cannot be a protagonist. Last but not least, the lone apartment kid. Maybe. That's all I'll say. Maybe. He's the only kid who isn't insinuated to be dead. And while so many of the other boys he was with were kidnapped by the Thin Man or something that looks just like the Thin Man, there's no reason to not believe that he may have slipped away somehow. Maybe, like Mono, this lone apartment kid was able to find somewhere smart and very obscure to hide, thus allowing both Mono and this apartment kid to escape. It's literally only that which makes it believable for the lone apartment kid to potentially star in the next game as the main protagonist. Plus, he never got his own individual comic episode in the newer comic series, so there's no other lore combating this idea. Furthermore, even if he did get snatched up by the Thin Man, the horrific adventure of Little Nightmares 3 could be all about playing the lone apartment kid as he escapes the signal tower and heads into the outskirts of Pale City. Sounds like it could be fun, right? No? That's okay. That's okay. With that being said, though, I think now I probably expect this character to be the next main protagonist. And then again, that's also assuming Six dies or gets imprisoned, because as much as I love her, it's like, I swear, everything this girl touches ends up perishing somehow. So long as she's not in the picture, it's totally believable to me for this kid to become the main protagonist of the next installment. And so now, that brings me to the end of this super long video. I'm sorry, guys. That brings me to the end of this video, I think. All that's left for now is for y'all to tell me what sort of things you might want to see from the Little Nightmares franchise at this point. Do you think it's possible for Mono to make a return as you can remember him as that cute little boyish kid? Do you think Six's story will continue for much longer? Who do you think will become the next antagonist or become the next protagonist? What do you think the next installment will be about? Most importantly, do you think we'll be seeing any more new Little Nightmares content anytime soon? Let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. Subscribe, like, comment, and all of you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful night.